I get this question a lot at my free Amazon interview coaching sessions. And the truth of the question of how many questions are you likely to get at your interview is that it varies enormously. And there are two key reasons why it varies, and I'll take you through both of those. The first is whether you're interviewing for a tech or a non-tech role. And the second is, well, it's much more complicated than that. So I'll talk you through that. If you don't know, I'm Gigi. I'm an ex-senior leader at Amazon, interviewer, hiring manager, and most significantly for you, I'm also an ex-bar raiser. So they don't come much more qualified than me to help you in your interview process. Okay, so how many questions are you likely to get in each interview? Let's say your interview is going to be an hour or 45 minutes. Generally, most interviews are. So let's talk about the difference between tech and non-tech. If you're a tech person, this will not surprise you to hear that your interviews will be a combination of both testing your technical competencies and also questioning you on the behavioral questions that link to the Amazon leadership principles. So in theory, your interviewers have got double the amount of content to fit into your 45 minutes or your hour than somebody who would be interviewing someone in a non-tech role. They're going to have to split their time in half. So logic dictates that you're going to end up with less behavioral interview questions in your interview than someone who is in non-tech. The slight nuance on this one is that some teams will combine in every single stage of the interview the competency questions and the behavioral. So maybe you'll get one competency question, one problem to solve, bit of code to do, whatever it might be, and then maybe one, maybe two behavioral questions in each interview. Other teams, however, might choose to do it differently, and they will choose to have a single interview, probably very high up the funnel, your first interview, completely dedicated to the competency side of things and testing your technical skills, and not even touch behavioral questions because they want to make sure that you can actually do the job on a technical standpoint before they even bother talking to you about the leadership principles. The best way to find out which one of those experiences you're going to have if you're a technical person is to ask your recruiter. There should be no good reason why your recruiter won't be clear and specific with you as to what the construct will be of your interview. So don't be afraid to ask them whether you should expect a completely technical interview or whether you should expect and therefore prepare for a mix between the technical, the competency, and the behavioral. So that's on the technical side of things. Broadly speaking, on the technical side of things, actually, I would say you're unlikely to get more than 2 questions on the behavioral side of things in that 45 minutes to an hour. There's just not enough time in that space to ask more than those kind of 1 to 2 questions if they're combining with the technical side of things. If they're not combining with the technical competency side, stay with me because what I'm about to say in terms of the non-tech becomes incredibly relevant for you. And I'll also stay with me anyway because right at the end, I'm going to give you the best freebie on Amazon interviewing on YouTube. I'm going to stake my reputation on that. I believe it's the best freebie anyone's going to give you. All right, so moving on then, let's talk about interviews where you don't have some technical competencies to work through. And these are purely behavioral interviews. And those interviews, as I said, let's assume they're 45 minutes to an hour long. So how many questions can you expect? Well, as a bar raiser, I was taught that the optimal number of questions to be asked in an interview that's an hour long is probably 3. That was what I was taught and coached to do as a bar raiser. The reason why 3 is each interviewer is meant to be assigned 2 leadership principles for their interview process. And they need to get a broad range of data. That's the whole point of the Amazon interview process, to gather as much data as possible so they can have a really, really wide range of evidence and then sift through it when they come to make the decision as to whether to move you on to the next round, or if you're in the final stage, whether to hire you or not. So 3 gives an interviewer an opportunity to cover each of the leadership principles once and then go back to one of those leadership principles that maybe they feel you didn't perhaps give them the very best answer that you could have given to give you another bite at the cherry. Or if one of those two leadership principles happens to be more important for the role, to give them and you another chance to gather even more data on what is the more important leadership principle of the role. Now that's in an hour's interview. In a 45-minute interview, fitting 3 questions in can be a bit tight. Now, it might not be tight if the answers from the candidate are really basic and simple and don't give you much depth, because then those won't last long enough. But for a good, solid answer from a candidate with plenty of time for follow-up questions from you as an interviewer, 3 questions in 45 minutes is a little bit tight. So again, my training taught me that in that time frame, I should be aiming for probably 2 questions. Again, 1 for each of the 2 leadership principles that I've been assigned. Now that's the ideal based on my training as a bar raiser. But the truth is that people are humans. And although people might have been coached to do something, and this is the second reason why the answer isn't quite as simple as I referred to earlier, people do different things because they have different preferences, or they have learnt things differently, or maybe you as a candidate do something that means there's a variation in that reality. So some interviewers may only ever ask you one question. If you as a candidate come up with an example in that first question that they start to ask you that they find so fascinating and so interesting and they think has so much richness and depth in it, they may well spend your entire interview, be it 45 minutes or even an hour, just digging and diving into that one question. On the other extreme, it may be that your examples as a candidate are pretty simple. They're shallow, it doesn't take you very long to explain them, and the interviewer just doesn't have enough complexity and depth in the information that you've shared with them to come up with interesting and thoughtful follow-up questions. And therefore, you give your starry answer, it's over in 3 minutes and the interviewer moves on. Well, if that's the case, let's say you've got an hour's interview. If your examples are only 3 or 4 minutes long and they're not particularly interesting or drive particularly specific follow-up questions, then you could find yourself trucking through quite a lot of questions in that hour period of time. I've seen interviewers get all the way up to 6 or 7 questions for candidates where their examples have been really shallow and uncomplex and they just haven't been able to have a decent dialogue with them. So I would love to be able to tell you that you will get X number of questions in your Amazon interview, and therefore you can calculate that by the number of interviews you've got and come up with your ideal number of examples to come up with. But it's just not reality. And anyone that tells you that they can tell you the absolute truth of exactly what's going to happen, unfortunately, isn't as experienced in Amazon interviewing that they might think they are. There are guidelines, there are things you're supposed to do, and then humans get involved and they do different things. So you should probably plan for some kind of an average. You should maybe ask your recruiter. Sometimes a recruiter will tell you prepare for 2 questions per interview. They can tell you to prepare for it. I can't guarantee, and neither can they, that the human beings that are going to interview you are going to stick with it. But perhaps ask your recruiter. If you can't get anything from your recruiter, go for 4. I say go for 4 because if you've planned for 4 per interview, multiplied by the number of interviewers that you have, if one interviewer only asks you 1 and another interviewer asks you 6, then you will, broadly speaking, have enough examples to get you through your Amazon interview. Now what you need to do is click on this link here and go and grab yourself one of my free Amazon Interview Wiz Academy Customer Obsession Masterclasses. Watch that and you will nail every single customer obsession question asked of you at your Amazon interview. Or if you'd like to do that later, check out this video here for more great Amazon interview tips on interview strategy.